Sometimes you read a book that is so fantastic, that is so impactful, that it makes you want to sit down and make an entire YouTube video dedicated to said book. And Oathbound by Tracy Deonn is absolutely one of these. Welcome back to my channel. My name is Kenzie Deeren, and I have a passion for fantasy books and rambling incessantly about them. Oathbound by Tracy Deonn is book 3 in the Legendborn cycle, which is one of my most anticipated reads of the entire year. Like, when I tell you I have been itching in my own skin to read this book, like that's not an exaggeration. I have been so excited to read this, and when I tell you it did not disappoint, this was exceptional. If I could rate a book 6 stars, I would rate this 6 stars. I am still left speechless days later and literally cannot stop thinking about this book to the point where I was like, you know what? I'm gonna make an entire YouTube video reviewing this because I can't get enough of it. So if you are looking for an exceptional fantasy series with multiple magic systems, one of those magic systems being related to King Arthur and the Round Table and his descendants, another magic system that discusses the connection between Black people and their ancestors along a generational plane. If you are looking for a looming demon war, one of the best, if not the best, FMC ever written in the fantasy genre, exceptional world building, lore, and history, amazing found family and side characters, fantastic character development, and a love entanglement, you have got to pick up the Legendborn cycle, because if you have not started this series and you are a fantasy lover, I have to ask, like, what in the world are you doing? So aside from the fact that I cannot stop thinking about this book or this series, I also wanted to make this YouTube video because I was doing a spoiler-free review of this on my TikTok, and I legitimately ran out of time. Like, you can make 10-minute videos, up to 10-minute videos on TikTok, and the fact that I had to cut things back, I went back in to edit the video to make my voice like the 2x speed. I was like, you know what? I clearly just have too much to say about this, so I would really rather get on here and yap and hope you guys want to yap along with me. I already know that this is going to be one of, if not the best book that I read the entire year of 2025, and I know it's early. I do not say that lightly. This is absolutely my favorite YA series that I have ever read, and it's honestly one of my favorite fantasy series in general. Since this is book 3 in a series, and I really try and make the majority of my content spoiler free, what I'm going to do is just give like a general overview of the synopsis of the Legendborn cycle series without any of the spoilers, just so that everyone's on the same page. And even if you haven't read this, you can still watch this video. And then I'm going to go back through and explain what about Oathbound in particular made it so exceptional. This series begins with our FMC Bree, who is a 16-year-old who is about to start an early acceptance program for gifted high schoolers at UNC Chapel Hill. Now, she is doing this in the wake of her mother's unexpected and untimely death. She was just in a car accident, and obviously Bree is dealing with immense grief from this. It is really palpable that she is struggling, as obviously one would, and on top of all of that, UNC Chapel Hill is also the school that her mother went to. So on her first night at school, trying to, make a new start, make new friends, Bree witnesses a magical demon attack at like the social event and outing for the students. And there's a mysterious boy named Sel who like fights off these demons and then basically mesmers everyone's memories away so that no one knows what's going on. No one has any recollection of this. However, this little mesmer does not work on Bree. No, it does not. So because Bree is absolutely like bamboozled and just blown away by what she just witnessed, she is like, oh, I'm not just letting this go. I'm following the breadcrumbs. I'm going to figure out what in the world is possibly happening here. This is crazy. So she ends up following these breadcrumbs and, this boy and the other students that were involved. And she finds herself in the midst of the Legendborn Society. And the Legendborn Society is a secret society at this college that their entire purpose is basically to protect humans from demonkind. And yes, these are in fact the actual familial descendants of King Arthur and the Round Table. So what is going on here is that King Arthur and his descendants, as well as the wizard Merlin and his descendants, they basically are able to practice magic that King Arthur and Merlin, they basically like cast a spell so that all their descendants would be able to practice the magic that they had in order to protect humans from demonkind. Long story short, there's obviously a lot more to that. And yes, you guessed it, one of my favorite characters, Sel, is in fact one of the descendants of Merlin, and he is called a Merlin. So on top of all of this just being insane and crazy for Bree to wrap her head around, something else starts to happen. So because Sel's mesmer on her did not work and she was able to retain the memories that were not supposed to be there any longer, Bree also starts to get some other memories trickling back into her mind. Some memories of the night at the hospital when her mother passed away. And it seemed that she has been mesmered before that night. How exactly is this connected? She's wondering, like, how in the world is my mother and my family and my mother's death connected to this secret magical society? So as one would, Bree said, I'm not letting this go either. And she decides she's going to infiltrate herself in this society and figure out what it has to do with her mother's death, how her family is connected into all of this, because she's not going to rest until there is justice. In order to do this, Bree forcibly kind of gets her classmate Nick to bring her into the society. So Nick is a golden boy. Nick is a self-exiled member of the Legendborn Society, and he is also Bree's school mentor. So she convinces him, like, you have to bring me into this society. I need to find out what happened to my mom. Like, you don't understand. She kind of forces him to do it a bit, but obviously Nick has a little bit of a crush on Bree too. So he does it against his, better judgment, against his will. He brings her into this society, basically says, okay, I'm no longer exiled, I'm back. And then they decide they're going to try and figure out what exactly happened to Bree's mom and what the connection is. So almost immediately upon being brought into this world, Bree is treated pretty horrendously because this is a legacy society where basically every single person is affluent, white, rich, and the deep embedded racism and misogyny of this group is crystal clear. Meanwhile, while Bree is dealing with all of that, we have a whole separate thing going on as well, because Bree is introduced to Rootcraft, which is essentially magic that Black people are able to use by communing with their ancestors. And by using this, she is able to uncover even more histories and deep secrets about her family and her family's history and lineage. And because all of that was just not enough for this poor girl, we also find out that there is a very serious looming war that is brewing beneath the surface between demons and the Legendborn. And this is why Bree was able to see the demon come into Earth at all. They're not supposed to be able to come on Earth, but something's going on. They're getting their way into Earth to try and, steal the energy from people. And the Legendborn cycle is basically saying we need to round people up because I think that this is going to be the final war that would literally change the tides of the planet. Obviously, I am literally just scratching the very surface of the plot points in this series because there is so much and the plot just explodes from basically where I am cutting this off. And I'm cutting this off because I don't want to give any spoilers, but my God, this series is exceptional. Every single book, exceptional. I literally didn't rate one of these below 5 stars. And as I said, I think that this one should be 6 stars. I honestly really loved Bloodmarked too. I think that should be 6 stars. Bloodmarked is book 2, if you did not know. So basically, just for a general synopsis of character development, book 1, which is called Legendborn, this is really our introduction into this world. It's our introduction to Bree, and it's also her introduction to all of these things. So she starts off book 1 as a teenager who is dealing with immense grief, immense trauma, and she's just trying to figure out what happened to her mom. And she's now literally thrown in the midst of all of these crazy magic systems. She's able to practice magic, and it's basically just her coming to terms and understanding what's going on, where are the stakes, what are the stakes, how am I involved in this, and what are we going to do from here. Book 2, which is called Bloodmarked, is definitely more adventurous. There's 8 million things that happen in that book. It is action-packed, it is fast-paced. I feel like that's the quest book where now Bree knows, what she is. She knows what's going on to an extent. Now it's what are we going to do with this? How are we going to handle these insane scenarios? And book 3, the real reason that we are here today, Oathbound. This is phenomenal. This is a triumph in the genre of fantasy. I am still left astounded at the utter mastery that is this book. So as I said, I'm just going to high level go through spoiler free reasons why this was so good. Obviously, Brie, our FMC, is like the number one reason why this book and this series is so exceptional. Her journey is heartbreaking, moving, and incredible to bear witness to, and she is absolutely one of my favorite FMCs ever written. Brie is strong, powerful, intelligent, resourceful, all while being vulnerable, which I think is very difficult to do, especially like to show as a written character, and Tracy Deonn writes Brie so well. She is never afraid to speak her mind. She is never afraid to stand up for what is right, no matter what the situation, even if she may experience detrimental consequences because of it. She's truly a born leader, and it just shines through every single page. This girl quite literally has the weight of the world on her shoulders by the time we get to this book, and she's always trying to do the right thing or help people she doesn't know. Like, she's just always trying to be, I think, the best version of her that she can be, even though she's truly pulled in so many directions throughout this series and in this book in particular. As I said, this series starts out with Brie just dealing with immense grief. She doesn't really know who she is, what her purpose is, and then we just are able to read her incredible journey to becoming this absolute powerhouse of a person, and she consistently proves that she is going to rise to the occasion no matter what and always outdo anyone's expectations of her. Like, the ending of this book, her character, I was flabbergasted. It was exceptional. Another reason why this series and this book in particular is so astounding is the impressive feat of the world building, magic systems, history, and lore that really shines through, especially in Oathbound, because it kind of comes to a bit of a culmination of all of that together in this book. Saying that Tracy Deonn's writing is masterful is honestly doing a bit of a disservice to her because of how incredible her writing is and how incredible her world building is. So yes, this is a contemporary urban fantasy. However, the magic systems, history, and just general world building within this series is so incredible. In this series, we end up having 3 separate magic systems. Like, in most fantasy books, there's only one. Like, she has 3, and each one of those has such detailed and in-depth like history and detailing that we are able to see in this book. As I mentioned earlier, the first magic system that we have is the Legendborn magic system. So this, as I said, it's the descendants of King Arthur, and basically there was a spell that Merlin cast on King Arthur in the Round Table where his descendants are able to use the magic that they once had in order to fight against demonkind. There is so many details and so much history within this society. So while we're reading this series, we have to learn like the ins and outs of the society itself, the ins and outs of the magic system. There is so much history included of King Arthur and Merlin and the Round Table. Like, we go into a lot of, memory flashbacks of this history. It is just so intricate and so impressive. And also, just as a little side thing, I did not mention this earlier, I did say that Sel is a Merlin, but when you are a Merlin, what you are is you are considered a Cambion, which is half demon and half human. So in this world, Merlin was half demon, half human, and his descendants are the same thing. The next magic system that we have, I also mentioned earlier. So this is called Rootcraft. And as I said, this is magic that Black people are able to channel by communing with their ancestors. And this can manifest in a plethora of forms. There's wild crafters, mediums, there are prophets, magnifiers, like a whole host of different types of magic can come from this depending on the person. This magic system is also obviously extremely detailed and comes with a lot of generational history, as well as just history of the United States that is inputted throughout this entire series. And finally, we also have the whole world, realm, and magic system of the demons. So there is a lot more of that information in Oathbound than there is in the other books. So it's basically like, 2 magic systems, 2 full history, not enough. We also have this third one, and it is so fascinating. So it's kind of, we're learning about in Oathbound how the demons originally came here, like what's going on with their realm, what's happening with their king, how is this connected to King Arthur and the Round Table and his descendants. We get all of that information. And of course, the demons have their own type of magic that we learn about as well. Another huge standout in this series is the way that Tracy Deonn is able to handle difficult topics in a straightforward, clear, and concise manner. A lot of times these topics are not addressed fully, or they're kind of like skirted around, but she addresses legitimate problems just head on. Like, there's no question what she's talking about. And I think that that is so important. It is so important to address topics like this in this sort of a way, because it forces people to acknowledge like the realities of what happens in the world. Racism is directly addressed in the series, as it absolutely should be. Our main character, Bree, is a Black girl living in the American South, and she is dealing with the very real realities of racism that are still extremely present in this society, especially because in this story, Bree is trying to navigate predominantly white spaces a lot of time, like for example, the Legend-born society. And this series just calls it out for what it is. They call out the behavior, or Tracy Deonn calls out this atrocious behavior, because this is the reality in a lot of places in this country still, unfortunately. For example, a topic in Oathbound that is discussed in particular that I thought was so profound and important was how no one seems to notice or care when a Black girl goes missing. Like, there's no search parties, it's not on the news, like people just kind of ignore it, and it's unacceptable. It's not okay when things like that happen, and it needs to be talked about and it needs to be addressed so that this can change. This series also does not shy away from the historically accurate and legitimate horrors of slavery in this country. So this is really delved into when Bree goes on a memory walk through her ancestral stream using the rootcraft magic that I discussed earlier, and the presence and prominence of generational trauma is heavily discussed in this series. So as I said, we go on these memory walks with Bree and earlier books in this series as she learns about the absolutely heartbreaking history of her family and the absolute horrors that generations before her have endured because of slavery and racism, and how that has legitimately affected every single generation since then, including herself. These segments are heartbreaking and moving, but they're so important. It is so important that they are written about in this way, because we're forced to acknowledge, we're forced to remember what actually happened. It wasn't so long ago that these things occurred, and they need to be talked about and they cannot be forgotten. We absolutely cannot brush over or forget these very real truths about our history, especially in today's climate. I really think that the emphasis on generational trauma and ancestral streams, it's so profound, and it really showcases how familial traumas and how occurrences that happened, generations ago really do impact a family generations later. As I said, oftentimes I think people are very quick to brush off traumatic events in history because it feels like it was so long ago. But the reality is, these events do not just go away. The effects of these things don't just disappear. And it's still very impactful to generations later. And the final thing that I will say in regards to why Oathbound is so fantastic is the beautiful cast of characters and their development, as well as the found family aspect in the series. So Oathbound is the first book that has multiple POVs, and it added so much to the story, in my opinion. Like, we're really able to understand and get to know the different groups that are in Bree's life because of these different POVs. In this book, we are able to go on multiple characters' journeys. Obviously, we go on Bree's journey as well, and we're taught so many lessons throughout these characters' points of view. For example, we learn that just because you are not the chosen one, that doesn't mean that you can't be impactful. It doesn't mean that you can't make a difference. You can still be powerful and do the right thing and make huge differences in the world, even if you are not, Bree Matthews. We also journey with the character as they come to terms with the fact that a lot of times being silent is being complicit, and that you need to stand up and be vocal and be there for the people in your life, and you should be vocal against injustices. Just sitting there and not saying anything, that is being part of the problem, and if you want to be better, you have to do better. We also contemplate the idea of good versus evil, and if someone is too far gone to ever really come back to themselves. Now, these are just some of the lessons that we learn in this book. That's just some of them. Just a few. It is actually mind-boggling how, I keep saying profound, but really how profound this book was. Bree truly has cultivated an exceptional group of people from all walks of life, and it kind of just comes to a culmination in this book where we're seeing all of the different alliances and relationships that she has made. From the scions of the Round Table, to the descendants of Merlin, half demon, half humans. And to root crafters, young and old, Brie really has surrounded herself with exceptional people that all come together to try and do the right thing. And obviously, I do need to mention this little love entanglement, as Tracy Deonn has now referred to it, between Brie, Cell, and Nick. Listen, I am a Cell girly through and through. Like, I loved the amount of Cell we got in Bloodmarked, but I will say Nick did immensely impress me in this book. We learn a lot more about Nick's truly torturous and horrid past, and we also see him doing the work actively to show up for Brie in the way that she needs him to. As I said, we definitely get a lot more insight into Nick and Cell's childhoods and kind of like why they are the way we are, and it definitely gives a lot more context to the current situations we are in. If you didn't know, book 2, Bloodmarked, was definitely Cell's book. I think Oathbound was Nick's book, and I think that book 4 is kind of gonna be like all of their books as we figure out what exactly is going to go on here, especially considering the insane cliffhanger that this book ended on in regards to that. Like, mind blown, to say the least. I legitimately love all of the characters, and at the end of the day, I am Team Brie. So whatever she decides to do, I will support, even though I tend to always root for like the tortured, morally gray one. So that would be Cell, even though I did really like Nick in this book. I digress. I will also just say I understand why we did not get a lot of Cell in this book. It totally makes sense. We shouldn't have. I just think he's so funny. Like, if you read this, the end of this book, I was like cackling whenever he was speaking. Like, he's so crazy and just like so, like, I love it. It made me giggle. What can I say? As I said at the beginning of this video, this is truly the best YA series I have ever read in my entire life. I think that this is one of the best fantasy series I have ever read in my entire life. The plot, the writing, the world building, it is just incredible. Like, I'm still at a loss for words. It is such a standout series. Listen, I think that this series should legitimately be required reading in the United States. Like, it is, there's so many important things that are discussed in this book. And if you ever take a book recommendation from me, I ask that this series be one of them. Let me know if you guys have read Oathbound in the comments. Let me know your thoughts. And thank you so much for tuning in.